She stood still. One step forward, and the march would stop. One step back, and the silence would shatter. But she didn't move, not yet. The crowd had gathered on the narrow street, boots thudding in rhythm, shoulders squared, eyes fixed straight ahead. The column stretched beyond sight, an unbroken line of men and women carrying the weight of a flag that no longer felt like a promise but a question. Dust lifted with every synchronized step. Sunlight caught on metal buckles, on rifles slung across backs. And then, a shadow. A single man stepped out, unarmed, thin, shaking. His hands trembled as he raised them to block the path. His lips moved, though no one could hear his words over the cadence of boots. The march slowed, and for a heartbeat the entire street froze. That's when her eyes locked on him. The guard, the one everyone whispered about. Her rifle rested against her shoulder, but she didn't reach for it. Her jaw tightened, her pulse steadied, and yet inside she felt the war of 100 choices colliding at once. She had been told this march must not break. Orders were clear. No one could block the way. But something about the man, the way his eyes darted, the way his chest heaved as if every breath might be his last, unsettled her. He wasn't just standing there. He was pleading, with silence, with defiance, with desperation. The others shifted uncomfortably. No one moved closer. Everyone was waiting for her. Because she wasn't just another soldier in this column. She was the one who carried the authority of silence. And silence can weigh more than 1,000 shouted commands. The man didn't lower his arms. He took one step forward, wobbling, his face pale under the harsh daylight. She felt her breath hitch, not because he looked dangerous, but because he didn't. He looked broken, fragile, the kind of fragility that can make someone unpredictable. Her finger twitched near the trigger guard. Not pulling, not aiming, just twitching. She had been here before. Not here on this street, not in front of this particular march, but in another town, another dusty road where a boy, 12, maybe 13, had stepped in front of her convoy. Empty hands raised, eyes wide with the same mix of terror and stubborn courage. She remembered the way the commander's voice crackled in her ear, "Clear the road, no delays." She remembered the weight of choice pressing down on her chest, and she remembered what came after. The boy's body had been dragged aside, and she had never forgiven herself for not stepping forward. Now, years later, the ghost of that choice stood before her again, this time in the form of a trembling man. The crowd behind her muttered. Some shifted their rifles, others waited for her signal. The air thickened with impatience, with unspoken judgment. She swallowed hard. She could feel their eyes burning into her back. She knew what they expected: firmness, authority, an act that would prove strength. But strength, she thought, isn't always what they think it is. The man's lips moved again. She couldn't hear the words, only saw them forming. One syllable, then another, then another. And in that moment, the march stopped breathing. Long before this day, long before she had become the silent figure others watched for guidance, she had been someone else. A cadet, overlooked. A girl in a sea of voices, louder, brasher, sharper. She had sat at the briefing table, ignored as plans were drawn without her. She had raised her hand once, maybe twice, only to feel the weight of smirks and dismissive glances. They didn't need her thoughts. They didn't want her questions. But she remembered one particular night, rain drumming on the tin roof above the barracks, a candle flickering low on her desk. She had written a single line in her journal: "One day, silence will speak louder than their noise." It had been her anchor, her quiet rebellion. She didn't shout, she didn't argue, she watched, she learned, she endured. Years later, when the others faltered under pressure, it was her silence that steadied them. That was the paradox they never saw coming. The girl they ignored became the guard they leaned on. And now, all of that history condensed into this single, fragile moment. A man blocking their way, his voice lost in the roar of silence, and her heart caught between past regret and present duty. She shifted her weight, one slow step forward. The column behind her bristled, rifles tightening. The man flinched, his arms shook harder. Her boots ground softly against the grit. She kept her hands low, visible. No sudden movements, her breath shallow, controlled. "Don't," someone whispered behind her. But she ignored them. She was listening. Not to the soldiers, not to the orders echoing in her memory, but to the faint, broken syllables on the man's lips. He was close enough now that she could almost piece them together. Not all, but enough. A name, repeated again and again, a name that cracked with sorrow. She froze. That name, it wasn't foreign, it wasn't distant. It was hers. Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred for a split second, as if the world tilted sideways. Why was he saying her name? Who was this man? She blinked, scanning his face again. And for the first time she saw it, not the stranger's mask she had assumed, but faint traces of something familiar. The lines around the eyes, the hollowed cheeks, the scar across the brow. Her heart lurched. He wasn't a stranger. Not completely. The silence grew unbearable. Behind her, impatience turned to unease. Ahead, the man's body shook with exhaustion. And she stood suspended between past and present, between command and conscience. She thought of the boy years ago. She thought of the voice that ordered her to move him aside, to silence his defiance. She thought of how her silence back then had been cowardice, not conviction. This was her chance, her moment to answer the ghosts that still followed her. She lowered her weapon fully, letting the strap bite into her shoulder. She took another step forward until she stood just a few feet from him, close enough to see the raw veins in his neck, the salt of dried sweat on his skin. He whispered her name again. This time she heard it clearly. Her stomach twisted. Her chest ached. And she knew in that single, piercing instant that everything about this mission was about to change. She didn't speak, not yet. Her silence carried more weight than words could. But inside, her mind was a storm. Who was he to her? Why here, why now? And what would happen to the march if she chose compassion over command? Questions roared louder than the boots, louder than the sun-cracked street. But answers had not yet arrived. All she knew was this. The man blocking the march wasn't just anyone. He was a piece of her story she thought had been buried. And the choice she made next, one breath, one motion, one word, would define not just her, but everyone standing behind her. The march waited. The world waited. Her silence held them all. And somewhere deep inside, the echo of her past whispered, "This time, don't look away." Why was he saying her name? The thought clung to her like a vise, making her pulse pound louder than the boots behind her. The man trembled, his arms still spread in fragile defiance, his lips forming that word again. Her word, her name. Her throat tightened as she whispered under her breath, low enough that no one else could hear. "Who are you?" He flinched. The words reached him, she could tell, his eyes widened, his breathing hitched. But his answer came as another whisper, faint, broken, swallowed by the heat and dust. She caught only fragments, a place, a year, a memory she wasn't ready to face. The soldiers behind her shifted impatiently. One cursed under his breath, another spat into the dirt. The tension spread like wildfire, gnawing at the unity of the march. They needed to move, but the longer they waited, the heavier the silence grew. Her commander's voice crackled in her earpiece, cold, clipped. "Guard, clear the path." Her jaw clenched, her eyes stayed locked on the man. "Clear the path." It was the same command she had heard years ago, when a boy with frightened eyes had stood in the way. She had obeyed then, obeyed with silence, with passivity, letting the will of others crush the fragile defiance of a child. And she had carried that silence like a wound ever since. This time was different. It had to be. She lowered her rifle completely, the weapon now nothing but weight against her shoulder. The soldiers stirred in confusion. She felt their disbelief ripple through the line, but she didn't care. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand toward the man, not in threat, in recognition. His lips trembled. He leaned forward a fraction, his eyes glistening. His whisper carried again, this time just enough for her to hear the full sentence. "I know you." Her breath caught. She felt the words strike deep, like an old scar splitting open. And in an instant, fragments of memory surged back. A long time ago, before she had worn the uniform, before she had carried a rifle across deserts and broken streets, there had been a winter. She was young then, still in school, still believing the world had edges she could one day escape. Snow piled high on the rooftops, muffling the world in silence. Her father's voice had been the one to wake her in the mornings, firm but gentle. Her brother's laugh had been the one to fill the evenings. Her brother. She hadn't thought of him in years. Not since the day he disappeared into the smoke of a war that had swallowed too many young men. His name was carved into her memory, but she had trained herself not to speak it aloud. It hurt too much. And now, staring at the trembling man before her, she saw it. The resemblance. The scar above the brow. The same eyes, tired, worn, but undeniably familiar. Her world tilted. Her brother. Alive. She almost staggered back, but forced her boots to stay rooted. Her soldiers couldn't see the tremor in her chest. They couldn't see the storm ripping through her. To them, this was just another obstacle, another nobody trying to defy their march. But to her, it was everything. Her brother's voice cracked as he whispered again, "Don't let them pass." The words struck her harder than any bullet could. Don't let them pass. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to demand answers. Where had he been? Why was he here? What had happened to him? But the march pressed against her back, its weight unrelenting. And the commander's voice bit through the static once more. "Guard, move him, now." She closed her eyes for a second, shutting out the noise, the orders, the impatience. She saw the boy again, not her brother, but that nameless boy on the road years ago. She remembered the regret that had never left her. Now, the ghosts of the past and the flesh of the present collided in this fragile, trembling man. Her brother. Her blood. Her unfinished story. The soldiers didn't know. They couldn't know. But one of them, Tors, the youngest in the line, barely 20, muttered loud enough for her to hear. "Why?" she hesitating. "It's just some crazy old man." Her chest flared with anger, not at Tors but at the blindness of youth, the way they saw only obstacles where others saw lives. She had been like that once. She had been taught to be like that. She turned her head slightly, just enough so her voice carried back. Calm, steady. "Stand down." The column stirred uneasily. Some obeyed, some didn't. The commander's voice hissed again in her ear. "Guard, last warning, do your job." Her jaw flexed, her silence deepened. She turned back to her brother, searching his face for something, a reason, a truth. He was shaking now from fear or exhaustion or both. His lips trembled as he whispered, "They don't know what they're walking into." Her pulse spiked. What did he mean? What was waiting for them ahead? The road stretched forward, sunlit and silent. Nothing seemed out of place. And yet, the way his eyes darted, the way his breath came in ragged bursts, told her this wasn't just desperation. It was warning. Her silence grew heavier. She thought of the march. She thought of the orders. She thought of the men and women behind her, trusting her judgment, even as some resented her hesitation. But more than that, she thought of the blood standing before her, her brother. A ghost returned. And the words he had spoken. Don't let them pass. Her mind spun. What could be waiting down that road? An ambush, a trap, a truth the commanders hadn't shared. Her brother's voice cracked once more. Please trust me. And that was when she realized it wasn't just a plea, it was a reversal. Years ago, she had begged him to stay home, to stay safe, to not join the fight that swallowed him. And he hadn't listened. He had left. Now he was the one begging. And she was the one standing at the edge of choice. Her silence wasn't enough anymore. She needed to act. She lifted her hand, not to strike, not to threaten, but to halt the march behind her. Her palms stretched wide, steady, commanding. The boots stopped. The rifles lowered, if only slightly. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. And in that pause, in that fragile suspension, she stepped closer to her brother. His eyes brimmed with tears. His lips trembled as he whispered again. You don't know what they're hiding from you. Her breath hitched. She leaned closer, her voice almost inaudible. Then tell me. But before he could answer, before the words could fully leave his mouth, the commander's voice erupted in her ear, furious now. Guard, what the hell are you doing? Clear him, or I will replace you where you stand. Her soldiers stiffened. Some raised their rifles again. The moment of control she had seized began slipping. She clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. Her silence cracked under the weight of command and conscience colliding. For the first time in years, she broke it. No. Her voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than any shout. The line froze. The commander's voice went silent. Even her brother seemed stunned. No, she repeated stronger this time. Not this time. And in that moment, she knew. She had crossed a line she could never step back from. The march stood in suspended disbelief. The street held its breath. The air itself seemed to thicken, waiting for what came next. Her brother's eyes glistened. His lips formed words she still couldn't fully hear, but his relief, raw, fragile, undeniable, told her enough. She had chosen. The question was, what had she chosen into? Because behind her, discipline fractured, anger brewed, trust wavered, and ahead the unknown still waited. And as the sun bore down on the frozen march, she knew this was only the beginning. What was he trying to tell her? The question pressed against her skull, louder than the commander's rage, louder than the restless boots behind her. Her brother's lips trembled, whispering truths she couldn't yet grasp, but his eyes carried urgency, fear, a warning meant only for her. The march shifted uneasily. Rifles clicked. A few muttered under their breath. Discipline was a fragile mask now, cracking with each passing second. She should have felt fear. Fear of disobeying, fear of punishment, fear of breaking the silence that had defined her role. But all she felt was a strange clarity, a cold, sharp thread of focus running through her chest. She had said no, and there was no taking it back. Her brother's shoulders sagged as if those two letters had lifted a weight from him. His arms wavered, lowering slightly, his strength fading, but his voice returned hoarse, urgent. They didn't tell you, they never tell you, ahead it's not safe. Her pulse spiked. Not safe. She glanced down the road, stretching out under the harsh sun. Dust shimmered in waves of heat. To the untrained eye it was empty, but her instincts told her otherwise. The unnatural stillness. The absence of birds, of stray dogs, of the tiny movements that usually breathed life into a street. It was too still. Her brother saw her hesitation. His voice cracked. They'll walk you straight into it. An ambush. You're not marching into victory. You're marching into their trap. The words hit her like shrapnel. Her breath caught. Her body stiffened. Her throat constricted around the swell of anger and betrayal that surged inside her. The commander's voice slashed through her earpiece, icy, controlled now, the calm before a storm. Guard, enough, remove him, that is an order. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because in that instant, every instinct screamed that her brother was right. The silence behind her began to fracture. Soldiers shifted uneasily, exchanging wary glances. Tor's young, impulsive, muttered again. She's losing it, we can't just stand here. But not everyone agreed. Marquez, older, scarred, the kind of man whose eyes carried more wars than most lived through, spoke low but firm. Wait. It wasn't much, just one word, but it carried weight, enough to quiet the line for a breath longer. She glanced back, locking eyes with Marquez. His gaze was steady, unflinching. He didn't need to say more, she understood. He had doubts too. And in that silent exchange, she realized she wasn't entirely alone. She turned back to her brother. His chest heaved. His face glistened with sweat. He looked both fragile and unbreakable at once, the way someone does when they've carried truths no one else dared speak. Her voice, when it finally broke through her lips, was soft but steady. What's ahead? He shook his head weakly. Not just soldiers, civilians too. They'll use them as cover, as shields. You won't see who's who until it's too late. Her stomach knotted. A wave of nausea climbed her throat. Civilians. The very thing she had sworn to protect. The very reason she had once believed in the uniform. Her brother's words struck harder than bullets. The mission wasn't about protection. It was about domination. And they had kept it from her, from all of them. Her silence cracked again. Why should I trust you? The words spilled before she could stop them. They were raw and desperate. Her brother's eyes glistened. Because I walked away from them, I know what they'll do, and because. He faltered, his lips trembled, his voice dropped to a whisper that seemed meant only for her. Because I couldn't save you then, but maybe I can now. Her chest ached, the ground beneath her felt unsteady. Memories surged of childhood, of laughter, of the day he had left for a war she hadn't understood yet. The day she had begged him not to go. The day he had promised he'd come back. And now here he was. A promise half kept. A warning burning in his eyes. The commander's voice returned, sharp, final. Guard, you have one chance left. Move him, or you will answer for insubordination. The soldiers stirred, some raising their rifles again. The fragile patience was gone. The march teetered on the edge of breaking. She felt every eye on her. Every expectation. Every ounce of pressure pressing against her silence. But her brother's words lingered. An ambush, civilians, a trap. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Her breath came shallow, sharp. And then, in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the dust and the heat, and the silence stretched too thin, she thought of something else. Something softer. Her mother's voice. Years ago, sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded around a chipped mug of tea. Her mother had looked at her with tired eyes and said, "The world will ask you to follow, but sometimes the only way to protect it is to refuse." She had never forgotten those words. And now, standing in the street, staring at her brother, hearing the commander's orders biting in her ear, she knew. This was that moment. She couldn't follow. Not this time. She stepped closer to her brother, her hand brushing his arm lightly, steadying him. Then she turned, facing the line of soldiers behind her. Her silence ended. "We stop here." The words cut through the dust like glass. The soldiers froze, some gaped, some cursed under their breath. Tor's snarled, "Are you out of your mind?" But Marquez's voice came again, steady, gravelly. "Why?" One word, simple, but it gave her the space she needed. Her eyes swept across the column, catching fragments of disbelief, anger, confusion. Her voice carried low, deliberate, but strong enough for every one of them. Because we're walking into something we weren't told about. Because there are civilians ahead. And because if we keep going, we'll be the ones to spill innocent blood. The silence that followed was different now. Heavier, more dangerous. Some eyes narrowed with suspicion, some with guilt, some with the first flickers of doubt. The commander's voice erupted in her ear, a thunderous roar. Guard, enough. You are relieved of duty, do you hear me? Relieved, step back or I swear. She tore the earpiece from her head and let it fall into the dirt. Gasps rippled through the soldiers. A few tightened their grips on their rifles. But others stood very still, their eyes betraying something else. Conflict. She had planted a seed. Her brother sagged beside her, trembling, exhausted, but his eyes shone with something she hadn't seen in years. Pride. She had chosen differently this time. But even as that fragile victory settled, she knew the danger wasn't over. The march was fractured, the chain of command broken. And ahead, hidden beyond the shimmering road, an ambush still waited. She couldn't stop it alone. She couldn't even be sure she had enough allies left among her own. But as she looked into the faces of the soldiers, into the mixture of fear and doubt and anger, she realized this wasn't just about orders anymore. It was about conscience. And the battle for conscience was only beginning. The sun burned above. The street held its breath. Her brother leaned on her arm, whispering one last trembling phrase. They'll come for you now, not just them, your own too. Her silence returned. Not empty this time, but heavy with truth. And as the dust settled, she knew the hardest march was yet to come. They were no longer waiting. She could feel it in the air, the shift, the break. What had started as whispers of doubt had hardened into a fracture that cut through the march. The line wasn't one body anymore. It was splintering. Half of the soldiers looked to her, uncertain, wavering, their rifles lowered. The other half bristled with anger, their loyalty chained to the voice in their earpieces, the one she had torn from her own. The commander hadn't spoken again, but she knew he was watching, listening, deciding. And when his decision came, it wouldn't be quiet. Her brother's breath rasped beside her, every inhale shallow, every exhale trembling. He leaned heavier on her arm now, though he fought to stand straight. His voice, broken and frayed, cut through her racing thoughts. They won't forgive this, you know that. Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer, she didn't need to. He was right. The line of obedience they had all walked was a chain, and she had snapped it. From somewhere down the column, a soldier barked, "She's compromised." Another added, "She's protecting him, he's the enemy." The words cut deep, but she didn't flinch. She knew the truth. Once doubt entered, fear followed, and fear demanded someone to blame. Her silence was their answer, and that terrified them. The first shot wasn't fired. It was ordered. "Detain her," the commander's voice thundered from someone's earpiece. Her stomach clenched. She had known it was coming, but hearing it was different, final. The younger soldiers, tours among them, shifted instantly. Rifles raised, eyes sharp, movements jittery with adrenaline, but not all moved. Some hesitated. Some lowered their weapons further. Marquez was one of them. His voice carried low, steady, the kind that came from too many years of watching orders lead to graves. "Think before you move." The tension snapped like a live wire. Some froze, some pressed forward, and in the middle of it all stood her, holding the weight of silence like a shield. Her brother clung to her arm, whispering so faintly she barely caught it. "Don't let them make you choose." But choice was inevitable. Her boots scraped against the dust as Torres stepped forward, rifle raised square at her chest. His jaw was tight, his hands steady, though his eyes betrayed the flicker of hesitation that comes with pointing a weapon at one of your own. "Step aside," he spat. "You're done." The column held its breath. Her silence stretched, heavy and deliberate, and then softly, calmly she spoke. "You'll be shooting the wrong enemy." Torres flinched, if only for a second, but pride steadied him. "The only enemy here is the one blocking the road." His rifle twitched toward her brother. Her pulse spiked. Heat flooded her chest. She stepped in front of her brother before the motion even registered, her body shielding him. The gasp that rippled through the soldiers was sharp, collective. And in that single step, she had drawn a new line. Her body, her silence, her refusal. The stillness shattered with the crack of static. The commander's voice tore through every earpiece at once, thunderous and merciless. "Take her down now." The words hit harder than any explosion. Tor's finger twitched against the trigger. Others raised their rifles, but hesitation clung to the air like smoke. No one wanted to be the first. It was Marquez who broke it. His voice carried across the line, steady, gravel rough. "You fire on her, you're firing on your conscience. You'll live with that forever." The words cut through the noise like steel. Some rifles wavered, some dropped, but not all. Her eyes locked with Tor's. His face twisted, torn between obedience and doubt. Sweat ran down his brow. His breath came sharp, uneven. For a moment she saw him, not the soldier but the boy beneath. Young, scared, trying to be strong. Her voice was soft, steady, meant only for him. "I know what it feels like to follow an order you can't take back. Don't make that mistake." The silence hung. His finger froze, his jaw clenched. And then, with a ragged breath, Tors lowered his rifle. The exhale that rippled down the line was audible, like a wind breaking through the heat. But it wasn't over. Because the commander wasn't done. The explosion came first. Not here, not among them, but down the road. A sharp, violent boom that rattled the ground beneath their boots and sent a column of smoke tearing into the sky. The march jolted, rifles raised again, this time toward the horizon. Dust and panic swallowed the stillness. Her brother clutched her arm tighter, his voice cracking. "That's it, that's the trap. They wanted you to be in the middle of it." Her chest heaved. The ground seemed to tilt under her. He had been right. The warning wasn't desperation, it was truth. And now, the truth burned in smoke just down the road. But even as the realization tore through the line, the commander's voice returned, venomous, unrelenting. "Do not stop, do not listen to her. Advance, damn it." The soldiers faltered, torn between the sight of smoke ahead and the voice screaming in their ears. She seized the moment. Her voice rang louder than it ever had, cutting sharp against the roar of confusion. "Look ahead, that's where he wanted you. Look at what you'd be walking into." Her silence was gone now, her words were fire. And they listened, eyes turned to the horizon, to the black smoke curling higher. Fear spread, yes, but so did doubt. For some, doubt was enough to lower their rifles forever. For others, it was enough to ignite fury. Because betrayal, once seen, cannot be unseen. But betrayal cuts both ways. A voice from the line, sharp, furious, shouted, "She's lying, she's protecting him." The fragile balance shattered again. Arguments burst, voices colliding, hands gripping rifles tighter. The column was no longer a march. It was a battlefield waiting to collapse inward. And in the middle of it, she stood, shielding her brother, fighting to keep them from destroying themselves before the real enemy even arrived. Her silence had once been strength, but now words were the only weapon left. "Listen to me," she shouted, her voice raw. "That smoke, that's what they didn't tell you. You walk into it, you die. Not as soldiers, not as protectors, but as pawns." Her words burned through the chaos. For some it was enough, for others it was too much. The division was complete. Her brother leaned closer, his whisper trembling in her ear. "They won't all follow, some never will. You need to choose who you can save." Her stomach twisted, her breath caught. Choose. She had spent her life avoiding that word. Obeying had been easier. Silence had been safer. But now choice was all she had left. She scanned the faces, Tors, shaken but alive with relief. Marquez, steady as stone, watching her with quiet trust. Others torn, wavering. And others still, their eyes hard, their loyalty chained to the commander's voice. There was no longer one march. There were two. And she was standing at the fracture point. The commander's voice slashed through once more, a final decree. Guard is a traitor, eliminate her, advance without delay. The last thread snapped. Rifles rose, some aimed at her, some at the horizon, some at the very men and women who had marched beside them hours ago. The world tilted into chaos. Her brother gripped her arm, his voice trembling but fierce. Whatever you do next will define all of them. Her silence returned, not weakness, not hesitation, but weight. The weight of a choice no one else could carry. And as the smoke from the road curled higher, and the soldiers' breaths came faster, and the world teetered between unity and collapse, she knew. Her next act would not just decide the march. It would decide who they became. The stillness before the storm was worse than the storm itself. Rifles aimed in every direction. Breaths came sharp, quick, uneven. Sweat clung to brows and dripped onto the dust. Some stared at her, rage burning. Others stared at the smoke on the horizon, fear twisting in their guts. And some, the worst, stared at each other, torn between who to believe. The commander's voice had cut the line in two. Her silence had widened it. Now, nothing could stitch it back together. Her brother's weight pressed into her side. His voice was faint, but his words pierced like steel. You can't save everyone. Her jaw tightened. Her chest burned. He was right, but it was the truth she had spent her life trying to outrun. A choice, always a choice. The first rifle cracked. It wasn't hers, it was Tor's. It came from a soldier halfway down the line, aimed not at her, not at her brother, but at Marquez. The shot missed by inches, sparking against the ground. And with that single mistake, the fracture shattered into chaos. The line erupted. Rifles roared. Shouts tore the air apart. Dust exploded under boot and bullet alike. Soldiers who had marched shoulder to shoulder just hours ago now turned their weapons on one another, their rage fueled by betrayal and fear. The march was gone, the mission forgotten. All that remained was survival. She pulled her brother to the ground, dragging him behind a burned-out transport husk abandoned on the roadside. Bullets slammed into metal and dirt around them, each one closer than the last. Her pulse hammered, her breath came ragged, the heat of gunfire pressed against her skin. This wasn't a battle, this was collapse. Her brother's eyes fluttered, weak, but his voice forced its way out. Don't lose yourself in it. That's what he wants. That's why he made you the target. She pressed a hand against his shoulder, steadying him, though her own hands shook. He was right. The commander's plan had worked. She was the fracture, and every bullet that flew, every scream that split the air was proof of how deeply he had broken them. Tor's voice cut through the chaos, ragged but strong. Guard's right, don't fire on your own. She glimpsed him through the haze, firing past her, not at her brother, but at the ones who had sworn to follow the commander's voice no matter what. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his rifle trembling but steady enough. For the first time she saw not the boy torn by doubt, but the soldier choosing. Marquez was beside him, moving with grim precision, his every step deliberate, his every shot controlled. He wasn't firing wildly. He wasn't consumed by rage. He was holding a line, drawing one from the chaos. And that line was around her, protecting her. But not everyone followed. Another crack split the air, this one closer, sharper. She turned just in time to see a figure break through the smoke, rifle raised straight at her chest. She froze. But the shot never came. Tor's had shifted first. His rifle barked once, twice, and the figure fell hard into the dust. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His choice had already been made. The battle around her spiraled. Soldiers who had once moved like one body were now locked in brutal personal fights. Knives flashed where rifles had run dry. Fists struck bone. Screams bled into the smoke. The commander's voice thundered again, desperate, commanding. Advance, advance, damn you. Eliminate her if you have to. But fewer listened now. The smoke on the horizon was proof of his betrayal. His voice no longer carried the same weight it once had. Still some obeyed, and those who did turned their fury straight toward her. The ambush arrived. From the horizon where the smoke had risen, figures emerged, not her soldiers, not her comrades. The enemy, armed, prepared, waiting for the chaos to ripen. They poured from the haze, rifles blazing, catching the fractured march in a storm of gunfire. The soldiers who had branded her traitor turned their rifles outward, too late. Bullets tore through their line. Screams ripped through the dust. And in the middle of it all, she held her brother tight, shielding him with her body as rounds chewed through the husk of metal above them. Her heart thundered, her lungs burned, but her silence even here held steady. Marquez dropped into cover beside her, his voice calm even through the storm. "You see now, he sent them straight into the fire, used us to light it." Her throat tightened, words pressed against her lips, but none came. Because she didn't need to answer. The truth was written in smoke and blood. Her brother's hand found hers, weak but insistent. His voice rasped, fragile but fierce. "You have to lead them, not with orders, with choice. Show them what they can be without his voice in their heads." Her chest ached, her breath caught. She had never wanted this. She had never asked for it. But she saw it now in Torres, in Marquez, in the few still standing, still fighting not against one another but against the real enemy. They didn't need another commander. They needed something stronger. Conviction. She rose. Bullets screamed around her. Dust tore at her eyes. Her brother's voice begged her to stay low, but she didn't. Not this time. Her silence was no longer enough. She shouted, raw, fierce, cutting through the storm. "On me, hold the line." For a heartbeat it seemed impossible. Chaos ruled. Smoke blinded. The enemy surged. But then Tor's voice echoed hers. "On guard, hold it." Marquez followed, then another, then another. And slowly, impossibly, a shape began to form out of the collapse. Not a march, not obedience, but a line. Their line. The battle roared. Enemy fire slammed into the fractured soldiers, cutting down those still loyal to the commander's voice. But those who had chosen her, who had chosen themselves, dug in. They fought not for orders, not for command, but for survival and for one another. She moved with them, firing, shouting, guiding not with command but with presence. Every step she took they followed, not because they had to, because they chose to. And in the dust and fire she felt it, the weight of leadership not taken but given. The kind that cannot be ordered, only earned. Her brother's voice carried faintly from behind her, weak but proud. "That's it, that's who you are." Her throat tightened, her chest ached, but she couldn't look back, not now. Because the battle was far from over. The enemy pressed harder, their numbers relentless. Every soldier who fell left the line thinner, weaker, and with every wave the commander's voice grew quieter in the earpieces of those who still clung to it, drowned by the sound of gunfire and the sight of reality. And in that drowning silence she felt the shift. The commander's grip was breaking. But so was hers. Her arms trembled from recoil, her chest burned from smoke, her body screamed for rest. And yet she stood. Because they stood with her. And for the first time, she understood the weight her brother had carried when he whispered the warning, when he bore the brand of traitor. It wasn't betrayal. It was protection. And now it was hers to carry. The battle raged into the night. By the time the gunfire dulled, by the time the last screams faded into dust and smoke, only fragments of the march remained. The road was no longer a path, it was a grave. Bodies littered the ground, some loyal, some doubting, some enemy, all the same now. She stood at the center of it, her chest heaving, her rifle heavy in her hands. Torres leaned against rubble, blood seeping from his arm, but eyes steady. Marquez knelt nearby, bandaging a fallen soldier, his movements precise, unshaken. Her brother lay against the husk, pale, weak, but alive. His eyes found hers. A flicker of pride, soft, fleeting, passed through them. And then exhaustion. He slipped into unconsciousness. Her throat closed, her chest ached, but she forced herself still. Because this wasn't over. Not by choice. Not by chance. But because the commander's voice would return. And when it did, he would find not silence, not obedience, but resistance. The silence after battle was never clean. It wasn't silence at all, not really. It was the groans of the wounded, the shallow gasps of the dying, the metallic click of weapons being reloaded even when no enemy remained. It was boots dragging through rubble, hands searching through the fallen for anyone still breathing. She stood in the middle of it, chest heaving, dust clinging to her lips, her ears ringing with a hollow buzz that made every sound feel distant, underwater. Her rifle hung loose at her side. Her fingers refused to unclench. The road that had once carried a march now looked like a scar carved into the earth. A scar she had carved, too. She glanced left. Tors leaned against a broken wall, his arm bound with a makeshift tourniquet. His face was pale, but his eyes hadn't lost their fire. He was alive, still choosing. To the right, Marquez moved among the fallen. His precision hadn't left him, each motion calm, deliberate, controlled, but for the first time she saw his hands shake. Not with fear, with grief. And behind her, propped against the husk of metal that had shielded them, her brother lay pale, his chest rising shallowly, his body held together by fragile threads of breath. She forced herself to turn away before her legs gave out. The line was broken. The march was gone. But those who had survived were looking at her, not at the commander's voice, not at the flag they once carried, but at her. And she hated it. Tor's voice broke the stillness, low but steady. "What now?" She didn't answer at first. Her throat was tight, her tongue heavy. "What now?" She wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse into the dust and let someone else carry it, but there was no one else, not anymore. Her brother's words echoed in her mind, soft but unrelenting. You have to lead them, not with orders, with choice. She clenched her jaw until her teeth hurt. She raised her head, and she forced her voice to be steady. We move, we hold who's left, we find ground the commander can't burn beneath us. The words tasted like ash, but they were enough. Tors gave a short nod. Marquez met her eyes and didn't look away. And slowly the survivors rose. Night fell hard. The march had no rhythm anymore, just broken fragments moving through rubble and shadow. Every step was heavy. Every glance backward carried fear of pursuit. The commander's voice had gone silent in their ears, but silence wasn't safety. They knew he would come for them, not because they mattered, but because their defiance couldn't be allowed to exist. The stars above seemed indifferent, scattered across the black as if mocking their struggle. And the air carried the scent of smoke and death, a constant reminder of what they had left behind. Her brother's weight pressed against her as two soldiers carried him between them. She walked close, every nerve taut, every breath a prayer she didn't know how to say. He had given her this burden, and he might never live to see what she did with it. They found shelter in the ruins of an old outpost, walls crumbled, roof half collapsed, but enough to break the wind and hide their silhouettes. Inside, the wounded lay on the cracked floor, their moans soft, their bodies pale. Tors lit a dim lamp, shielding it with his jacket. Marquez worked quietly, binding wounds with cloth stripped from uniforms, using water sparingly, whispering to each soldier as though words could stitch what hands could not. And she sat against the wall, rifle across her knees, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every gust of wind sounded like boots. Every silence felt like a prelude to a voice that had once commanded them. She hated herself for waiting for it, for bracing for it, for knowing it would come. Her brother stirred. His voice cracked through the haze, barely a whisper. "You're holding them." Her throat tightened, she shook her head. "They're holding me." A faint smile ghosted his lips. "That's what they need, not someone who orders, someone who stands with them." Her eyes burned. She pressed her hand over his, felt the weakness in his grip, the tremor in his skin. She wanted to tell him to rest, to stay silent, to save his strength. But she couldn't, not when his words were the only thing keeping her steady. "Don't leave me with this alone," she whispered, voice breaking. His eyes fluttered closed, his breath shivered, and though he didn't answer, she knew he had heard. Hours bled into dawn. The survivors gathered in the dim light, faces hollow, eyes sunken, soldiers stripped of certainty, carrying only the weight of choice. She rose, every bone in her body aching. Her voice was low, cracked, but steady. "The commander won't stop. He can't. We broke his march, but he'll come again, harder with more. We can't march anymore. We can't hold ground for him, but we can hold each other." They listened. Not all believed. She saw doubt in their eyes, fear in their silence, but they didn't turn away. "Every step we take now is our own. Not his, not mine, ours. That's how we live. That's how we make this matter." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not empty. It was choice. And one by one, heads nodded, not in obedience, in resolve. Later, Tors found her outside, watching the horizon. "You know he'll come," he said. She didn't look at him. "I know. You know we're not ready." Her jaw clenched. "I know." He was quiet for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "But I'll still follow you, not because I have to, because I want to." Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard, forcing her eyes to stay fixed on the horizon. "You might regret that." Tor's voice was soft, almost a smile. "Maybe, but not today." That night she dreamed. She was back at the old briefing table, the one where her voice had never been heard. The room was filled with faces, commanders, officers, soldiers. They argued, shouted, dismissed her with smirks and sighs. But in the dream, she didn't raise her hand. She stood, and the room fell silent. Not because she shouted, not because she demanded, but because they saw her. When she woke, her face was wet with tears. The days that followed blurred into one another, moving by night, hiding by day, counting supplies, rationing water, tending wounds. The survivors leaned on her, but she leaned on them too. Marquez's quiet steadiness, Tor's defiant humor, even through pain. The nameless soldiers who had once been shadows in the march but now carried stories, regrets, hopes whispered in the dark. One spoke of a daughter waiting by the coast, another of a farm that had been burned but not forgotten, another of nothing at all, just silence, heavy with loss. Their humanity weighed on her more than their rifles ever had. And each night she felt her brother slipping further, his breath shallower, his strength fading. She couldn't lose him, not now, not when he was the thread that held her together. But she saw it in his eyes, the acceptance she couldn't bear. Then on the seventh night, the silence broke. Not with whispers, not with groans. With a voice. Faint at first, carried through static in the calms, still clinging to their uniforms. A voice that once commanded them. "The commander. You thought you could break me. You thought you could steal them from me, but I am the march, I am the voice. And you are nothing but a shadow. I will burn the ground you stand on. I will erase your silence." The words crawled into her skin, into her bones. But this time she didn't flinch. Because when she looked around, she saw it in their faces, the fear, yes, but also the defiance. His voice no longer held them. And for the first time, she felt hers rising to meet it. The voice did not fade with static. It lingered, low, deliberate, crawling through the night like smoke that would not disperse. "You run," the commander said, his tone a knife dressed as a whisper. "But you run in circles, Every ruin you hide in is one I've already mapped. Every soldier you lean on is one I already counted as mine. You cannot escape me. You cannot silence me." The calm cut, but the echo did not. It stayed in their heads, in the hollow places where trust once lived. Some shifted uneasily in the dark. Others clutched their rifles tighter, as if steel could guard them from words. She sat against the broken wall, her eyes closed, her breath steadying, though inside her chest thrashed like a bird in a cage. The commander was not hunting them with bullets, not yet. He was hunting them with memory. At dawn, the sound of rotors split the sky. The survivors scattered, pulling her brother into the shadows of the ruins. Dust whipped through the air as drones passed overhead, their searchlights carving white scars into the rubble. She held her breath, pressing her palm against her brother's chest, feeling the weak rise and fall, as if her hand alone kept him tethered to this world. The drones swept past, but they would be back. This was not random, this was tightening. That evening, Tors confronted her. "You can't keep running him through this," he said, nodding toward her brother. "He's too weak. He won't survive another night like this." Her throat tightened. "I know." "Then what's the plan?" Her silence stretched heavy. Because the truth was, she had none. Her brother stirred faintly, his voice rasping, broken but insistent. "There is a place, not far, a ridge where the signal dies, where his voice can't reach." She turned to him sharply. "Why didn't you tell me before?" His eyes, sunken and weary, flicked toward hers. "Because you weren't ready to hear it." They moved at nightfall. The ridge lay 3 days east, through shattered towns and broken farmlands. The path was not safe. Nothing was safe anymore. But the promise of silence, real silence, beyond the commander's reach, was enough to keep them moving. Every step was heavier than the last. Supplies dwindled, wounds reopened. They carried more dead than living by the second day. And yet she pressed forward, because each step felt like defiance carved into the earth. On the third day, the trap was sprung. Gunfire cracked from the ridges above. Dirt erupted around their boots. The survivors dove for cover, dragging the wounded behind them. She pressed her brother into a shallow trench, her body shielding his. Her rifle snapped to her shoulder, eyes scanning the ridgeline. And then she saw him. Not the commander himself, but his men, armored, disciplined, eyes blank as if their will had been hollowed out. They fired not like soldiers, but like echoes of a single voice. Her heart hammered. She returned fire, her shots precise, controlled, cutting through the haze of dust. Tors shouted orders, Marquez pulled the wounded back, and the line, their fragile, fractured line, held again, if only barely. But above the gunfire, above the screams, she heard it. The commander's voice, carried through loudspeakers planted on the ridge. "You call her leader, you call her guard, but she is the reason you bleed. She is the silence that kills. Ask her what her brother did. Ask her why he stood against me long before you did. Ask her whose blood bought his silence." Her chest seized, her hands trembled. She fired again, but her bullets could not cut his words. That night, after the enemy withdrew, the survivors sat in a half-circle around a smoldering fire. Their faces were hollow, their eyes restless. One soldier finally broke the silence. "What did he mean?" She froze. Another spoke, sharper, angrier. "What did your brother do?" All eyes turned to her. Her brother lay nearby, drifting in and out of consciousness. His skin was pale, his breath shallow. He stirred at the words, his lips parting as if to speak. She shook her head. "Not now, he's too weak." But the silence that followed was heavy with doubt. And in their eyes she saw it, the fracture, thin but growing. Later, when the others slept, she knelt beside her brother. His eyes fluttered open, catching hers in the dim firelight. "You heard him," she whispered. "They all did. He's using you to break us. Tell me the truth, please." His breath shuddered. his voice a whisper pulled from the edge of darkness. It wasn't betrayal, not the way they think. I broke ranks because I saw what he was becoming. The voice, it wasn't command anymore. It was hunger, a need to own us, to strip us down until we weren't soldiers, just shadows. Her chest ached. Why didn't you tell me? His eyes glistened, hollow and tired. Because I couldn't protect you if you knew. If you carried that truth, he would have crushed you before you could stand. Tears burned her eyes, but she held them back. You branded yourself traitor to keep me safe. His lips curved faintly, brokenly. Not traitor, shield. The ridge loomed on the horizon the next evening, jagged against the blood-red sky. But so did the commander's forces. Columns of soldiers moved across the valley below, their march steady, unbroken. The sound of boots carried on the wind like a drumbeat, relentless. Her survivors huddled in the ruins of an old farmhouse, watching the valley fill with shadows. Tor's voice was grim. We can't fight that, not out here, not like this. Marquez's jaw tightened. Then we don't fight to win, we fight to reach the ridge. If it kills the signal, it kills his grip. All eyes turned to her. She felt the weight of their stares, their breaths, their fragile hope. Her silence stretched, then broke. We fight, not to kill, not to hold, to get through. Every step we take toward that ridge is one he doesn't own. The dawn attack was brutal. The commander's men swept down the valley in waves, their rifles spitting fire, their voices silent as if they had none left but his. She led from the front, rifle in hand, her boots pounding the dirt, her breath burning in her lungs. Torres fought at her side, grim determination carved into his face. Marquez covered their flank, dragging the wounded, firing in sharp bursts that kept the line alive. The ridge drew closer, each step bought with blood. But so did the commander's voice. Through the loudspeakers, through the comms, it thundered. You think you are free, you think silence can save you. Your silence is weakness. Mine is power, you cannot strip it from me, you cannot erase me. She gritted her teeth, firing into the haze. Her chest burned, her arms ached, but she did not falter. Because for the first time, his voice no longer filled her. Her own silence answered. By nightfall, they reached the base of the ridge. The survivors collapsed against the rocks, their breaths ragged, their bodies broken. Half their number was gone. The rest clung to rifles with trembling hands. Her brother lay against her, his pulse weak, his lips pale. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw both pride and farewell. You carried it, he whispered. Now carry them. Her throat closed. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her forehead to his, her voice a vow. I will. He smiled faintly. That's all I ever needed. His eyes closed. His breath slipped away. And she held him in the silence, her body shaking, the world blurring but her grip unbroken. Above, the commander's men regrouped for the final push. His voice thundered from the valley below. This ends here. She cannot save you. She cannot save herself. She rose slowly, her brother's weight still against her. Her rifle felt heavier than ever. But her silence was steady. And for the first time, it felt stronger than his voice. The night was not silent. Not yet. The ridge loomed above them, jagged and black against the bleeding sky, a wall of stone and shadow. Behind her, the survivors huddled in broken clusters, their rifles loose in trembling hands, their faces gray with fatigue and grief. And before them, across the valley floor, the commander's army gathered, a sea of helmets and rifles, boots striking dirt in perfect rhythm, a drumbeat that made the ground itself throb. His voice thundered over it all, booming from hidden speakers, crawling through their bones. You will not climb, you will not escape. I am silence, I am order, you are nothing without me. The survivors flinched. Some pressed hands to their ears as if the sound itself could cut. Others stared hollow-eyed, They were leaking out like water through a broken jar. But she stood, rifle across her chest, boots planted in the dirt, her brother's lifeless weight still resting in her arms. She lowered him gently, reverently, against the rocks at the ridge's base. Her fingers lingered on his shoulder, her throat tightening. Then she rose, her jaw set, her eyes burning. She would climb, and she would end this. The commander's men advanced. Rows of soldiers, their eyes empty, their movements perfect, as if every heartbeat was tethered to the voice above. They fired as one, their rifles spitting fire, their boots pounding in time. Bullets tore the earth, rocks splintered, dust erupted in choking clouds. She surged forward, her body moving before her mind could question. Torres fell in at her side, his face pale but his rifle steady. Marquez took the flank, teeth bared in grim defiance. "Push them back," Torres roared. "Give her the path." The survivors rallied, weak, wounded, hollow, but still human, still defiant. Their rifles cracked in jagged rhythm, not perfect, not synchronized, but alive. The line staggered but did not break. Each step toward the ridge was bought with blood. Each scream, each bullet, each gasp of breath was a refusal. And still his voice thundered. "You cannot silence me, you cannot escape me. I will fill you even in death. I will be the last thing you hear." Her chest burned, her ears rang, but she kept moving, step by step, shot by shot. Her silence pressed against his voice like a blade against a chain. At the ridge's base, the survivors made their stand. Torres and Marquez held the line, their shouts barely audible above the storm of bullets. The others dug into the rocks, firing upward, covering her ascent. Because she did not stay. She climbed. Hand over hand, boots slipping on stone slick with dust and blood, she pulled herself upward. Bullets sparked against the rocks. Fragments cut her arms, but she climbed. Every muscle screamed, her lungs burned, her body begged her to stop. But she did not stop. Because silence was waiting at the summit. And it was hers to claim. Halfway up, the voice grew louder. It filled the sky, a storm with no lightning, a roar with no face. "Do you think you climb away from me? Do you think stone can cut my reach? I am above you, I am below you, I am within you." Her grip faltered. The stone tore her palm. For a heartbeat she dangled above the valley, the ground a grave yawning below. But then she heard another voice. Not his. Her brother. Faint, fatting, but still there in memory. Not traitor, shield. She bared her teeth, forced her body higher, blood streaking the rock beneath her hands. "I carry you," she whispered, breathless, "and I carry them." The climb did not stop her. The voice did not stop her. She rose. At the summit, the world changed. The air thinned. The valley stretched below like a scar, filled with fire and shadows. The commander's army swarmed the ridge's base, still firing, still shouting, still moving in perfect, empty rhythm. But here at the crest, the voice faltered. It crackled, it broke. For the first time, it weakened. She fell to her knees, chest heaving, sweat and blood streaking her face. The silence was not full yet, not pure, but it bled through the cracks, a fragile golden thing. And then she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, behind her. She rose. The commander stood there. Not a phantom, not a voice through static, a man, flesh and bone. Tall, armored, eyes burning cold beneath the shadow of his helmet. His rifle slung at his side like a forgotten tool, his presence alone pressing heavier than any weapon. "You climbed," he said, his voice quieter now, no longer booming from speakers, no longer carried by machines. It was raw, human. And for what? Her rifle rose, steady despite the tremor in her arms. "For them," she said, her voice steady, flat, unshaken. His lips curved faintly, almost pitying. "They are already mine." She shook her head. "No, they chose to fight, even when broken, Even when dying, that's more than you will ever have. He moved first. Not with a shout, not with rage, but with calm precision. His hand snapped to his sidearm, his body shifting with soldier's grace. She fired. The bullet clipped his shoulder, spinning him back. He grunted, staggered, but did not fall. He fired. The round tore past her ear, searing heat against her skin. They circled, rifles cast aside now, reduced to sidearms and fists and will. He lunged, striking her across the jaw. Pain flared white, stars bursting in her vision. She staggered, fell to one knee. But she rose. He pressed forward, blows sharp, efficient, trained. Each one designed to break, not kill. She blocked, she countered. Her fists split his armor at the seams, her blood mixed with his. The fight was not elegant, it was not clean. It was raw, brutal. Two wills colliding on stone, each strike an argument, each gasp a refusal. And above them, silence deepened. His voice cracked with every word now. "You cannot stop me." Her fist drove into his chest, her knee into his gut. He staggered, blood on his lips. She seized his collar, her face inches from his, her voice a whisper. "I already have." And she drove him back into the ridge's edge. The commander fell. His body tumbled, heavy, broken, vanishing into the swarm of soldiers below. His rifle clattered against the rocks, then silence swallowed the sound. And then the army stopped. Thousands of soldiers froze mid-step, rifles lowering, eyes blinking as if waking from a long, suffocating sleep. The loudspeakers crackled once, twice, then died. Silence fell. True silence. Not empty, not oppressive, but free. She stood at the summit, chest heaving, body broken, bloodied but unbowed. Below, the survivors lifted their heads, their faces filled with something they had not carried in years. Breath, real breath, unchained. Torres looked up, eyes wide. Marquez let his rifle fall, staring at the ridge as if it were holy ground. The army that had been their executioners now stood uncertain, unmoored, no longer chained to a single voice. And at the base of the ridge where she had left him, her brother lay in silence, not broken anymore, not tainted by betrayal. Only remembered. The sun broke through the clouds. It spilled across the ridge, across the valley, painting the ruins in gold. She lowered her weapon, closed her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to weep. Not just for her brother, not just for the dead, but for the silence that had finally returned, the silence that belonged to them and no one else. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, the world listens.